Hi everyone, Corey here with Team Cramer Fishing, and this video is going to be a review of the Okuma Avenger Bait Runner reel, specifically the ABF 20B. Okay, for those of you who aren't familiar with bait runner reels and how they work, basically what they have is a two drag system. One of the drags is in the back and is adjusted with this knob. That's your kind of free spool style or light drag. And then your other drag is kind of like your standard spinning reel, and you can adjust it right here on the front. You shift between the two by flipping this clutch. So you flip it up. Okay, so when the clutch is flipped up, fish can grab your line if your rod is just sitting on the ground and just pull it and go running off like this, and your rod will not get yanked into the water. When you notice it and you go over to pick it up, to pick your rod up, you can either push this down manually or just start spinning your reel, and the clutch will switch over, and it'll switch over to the fighting drag, which is usually set more stiff and more hard, so you can fight the fish. And you can adjust that right here as you're fighting the fish, so if you want more drag, you can put it on. So if you ask me, bait runner reels are one of the best inventions in fishing. Don't know when they were invented, but if you're a parent and you're fishing with kids, I highly recommend that you get some type of bait runner reel, even if it's just a cheaper one. And they usually cost a little bit more money, but the benefit is you don't have to sit and stare at your rod tips all the time, watching for a bite, worrying that if a big fish comes along, it's going to yank your rod into the water. Or you don't have to manually set your drag super duper light and then pick it up, readjust it, and then try to readjust it for each fish. It's preset, so you're ready to go. Once you engage that second drag, you're ready to fight your fish, and it's just the most convenient thing ever. If you're fishing multiple rods, and especially if you're fishing with a bunch of kids, so that you can keep an eye on your kids, or you're taking other people fishing like I do all the time. So I spend 90% of my time retying, rebaiting for everybody, getting people snags out and doing that type of thing. And this really allows me to just let my rod sit in the water and not have to worry about them. If a big fish does come, grabs my bait, it's going to have a little time to run. I don't have to worry about anything until I get over to my rod and notice that it's tipping down. Okay, the reel sells right now on Amazon for about $44. Those prices do fluctuate sometimes. I think when I bought mine, I actually paid closer to the list price, which is $59. So $44 is a very good price, and right now that's what it costs on there. That's specifically for the size 20. Now, the size 20 is what I think is one of the more interesting things about this reel. I specifically went out to try to get the smallest bait feeder reel that I could find. So a size 20 Okuma is similar to like a 2000 size reel. So let's take a look at how this compares to some of the other sizes really quick, and then I'll tell you why I wanted to see how well this small 2000/20 size works. Okay, so here's the box that it came in case you want a reference for exactly which reel this is. If you want to see some of the specs, probably the most relevant one on here is the line capacity. So I started off with using 20-pound braid on this, which would be the equivalent of a 6-pound mono. So in that case, it held 110 yards of line. I switched it up to 30-pound braid because the 20-pound was, when I'm fishing on rocks, it just got worn a little bit too much, a little bit too easily, and the 30-pound does much better. So, but then you go down to 90-yard spool capacity. Okay, gear ratio is 5.0 to 1, so you have to spin a lot to take your line in fast. but it's a very small size. So let's take a look at how it compares to some other bait feeders that I have. The reel that it's next to here is a Penn Fierce 2 2500. So this is like a 2000 size. This is a 2500 size, naturally a little bit bigger. The profiles of the reel are similar, looking at them from this angle, but the spool size is where it makes a big difference. So I'm not sure how well it's going to come across on the camera, but the spool size of the Penn Fierce 2 is quite a bit bigger than the Okuma. And if you take a look at the line capacity, if you go again to that 8-pound mono, let's see if we can see it here, which is the equivalent of the 30-pound braid that I have on, it's 175 yards. So you're getting double the spool capacity on this as you are on this. However, this reel is quite a bit heavier. I don't know the exact ounces, but it's quite a bit heavier than the Okuma. It's also quite a bit more expensive. If you do end up getting this, the Okuma for $44, this pen usually sells in the 60s somewhere, mid to low 60s. And again, the price always kind of varies a little bit. So you're spending more money for this. I'm going to get back to these two in a minute because they're probably comparable in some ways, but not comparable in others. I also want to compare it to the generic kind of Chinese Amazon Dr. Fish bait feeder reel. I've done a review on these two. They sell in the 30s usually, so a little bit cheaper than the Okuma. But in my opinion, and this is a 3000 size, so it's a little bit bigger. You get 170. It has more of the spool capacity, same spool capacity as the Penn, almost double the Okuma. But really just inexpensive plastic parts. Mine both still work. They're good when I need to load up a bunch of rods for the whole family and I have a bunch of line soaking and I don't want to buy a bunch of expensive reels, but I still want to have the bait feeder feature. So you get that feature with with these Hercules, but they are cheap reels. They're not going to last if with heavy use, you know. But they do serve a purpose for a very inexpensive low-end reel if you need to run lots of reels and you're not fishing for really giant fish. So, and then the next size we'll compare it to, this is the only other bait feeder I have. This is an older Cast King. This might be the first Sharky. I think they're on the Sharky 3 now. This is the Sharky 1. And this is a 50 or 5,000 size reel, so it's much bigger. I haven't used it very much. Again, it has a metal frame, but it's a lot of plastic pieces. I mean, even without any use, you can see all the plastic stuff gets dinged up pretty bad. I haven't really used this reel enough to do a full review on it yet. It's kind of a backup or a spare reel that I use if we're going to go fish for some bigger fish, but mostly because of its size I don't use it. I just don't like lugging around something that big, which is what brings me back to the wonderful size of this reel. In terms of actual fish that you're actually likely to catch in freshwater, this reel is more realistic. You're not usually going to hook into a fish big enough to spool 100 yards worth of line if you really crank the drag down, which with 30-pound line on this, you can go full drag down if you happen to click into something really big and you think you have a hook that can take that pressure. And I'm not saying it couldn't happen. If you hooked a big enough fish in the current in the river somewhere, you could get spooled on this reel. But the percentage of fish that are going to spool you on this are less than 0.1% probably. I mean, it's very, very small. And you'd also have to hook into them when you weren't really fishing for them, because if you knew you were going to go out, catch a giant fish, you're going to use bigger gear, bigger baits, bigger everything. So very unlikely to hook into something. But I actually think you have a legitimate chance, if this is spooled up with about 30-pound braid, to catch a very big fish, even if the reel isn't quite designed for it. You get like 3/4 of a football field worth of line capacity to fight the fish with. And I've caught, the biggest fish I caught on this was about a 10-pound carp, and it handled it just no problem. I mean, I feel pretty comfortable saying, unless you're catching big fish every day in the teens and 20s, that this reel is fine for fish up to like 20 pounds, for the occasional big fish that you're going to come across. And then you could catch fish up to 10 pounds all day long and, you know, not even notice. If you're using it for catfishing, like for channel cats, I feel pretty comfortable saying you're not going to have any problems. Now, that said, so let's put the really cheap reel aside that you're probably only going to buy if you really need to load up a bunch of rods, and we'll put the really big one that you're hardly ever going to use aside, and we'll compare the Penn, which has really been my go-to primary reel that I love the most, against the Okuma. So when I first got this Okuma, my first impression was that it felt really cheap for the money. Of course, I paid $59 for mine, instead of $44. So I was used to the Penn. The Penn has all metal body, frame, everything basically. And this Okuma is mostly, it just has a lot of plastic. It's a lot lighter, but it just feels like a flimsier reel. It doesn't feel any different in terms of the feel of the reel as, or not much different, we'll say, as the cheap Chinese ones. All right, it feels a little bit better. The clutch is better, for sure. You can immediately tell that. I mean, it is a solid, crisp clutch. Just, and when you spin it, you know, it works just as well. The reel is plenty smooth, has a nice handle. There's just not really much to complain about, other than it just feels much flimsier than the Penn. It is lighter than the Penn. And so the whole point of getting a small reel like this is that it is light. You can put this on a light setup or medium light setup, and you can fish for like everything. And if you wanted to put it on like 2 rods and just have 2 of these soaking, you know, or have one of them soaking and fish with your other one, you would do just fine. Or if you only had 1 rod and you did one setup and you did lots of different type of fishing, and you did more, sometimes you'd catfish and sometimes you'd bass fish, this is a great rod to go in between because of that bait feeder feature. But it doesn't, it's a very light reel for a bait feeder. It's probably the lightest one you can find, I would guess, unless you got really high end, or at least double the price, we'll say. So this reel, in my opinion, is worth 44 bucks. You get up to 60 bucks, and then I'm going over to the Penn, okay? And if I had to only have one of them, I would pay the extra money for in the 60s-ish dollars range to get the Penn 2500 live liner, which is what this is. Penn Fierce 2 2500 live liner. I've done a review on it too a while back. It might have been 2 years ago. So this is 3 seasons going on this reel, and it's just still going strong. I mean, it's my go-to reel that I trust in probably more than any other reel. And this one is kind of like a cheaper, lighter version of that, okay? But I feel like it will get the job done, and at that $44 price point, that's where it belongs, in my opinion. At that price, it's worth spending the money. So I'll leave a link down in the description to the Amazon page that has this reel. And if you want to check out what I have to see about the Penn, I probably should do another follow-up review now that I've had it for 3 full seasons. And it's working just as well. But I like it just as much as I did in my original review, so you can check out that review too. But if you're looking for a very small, very versatile bait feeder reel that really functions like a regular reel with this, because of its lightness and smallness, but with a bait feeder, Okuma did a good job on this. And the only downside is probably eventually this durability is gonna, you know, catch up to the frame. And whereas if I hooked into a giant fish on this Penn, even with the small size, I have total confidence I would have a very good chance to get it in. Whereas with a smaller spool size of half the size on the Okuma,
you might not be able to get it in. Or if you have to cast a very long distance to get your bait into the water, so if you use half your spool to just get the bait in the water, that doesn't leave you much left on this, especially if you're not running with a full spool. Whereas you have a lot of ways to play with the Penn, but the Okuma is cheaper. So if you're not sure and you want to try out a bait feeder and just see if it's worth it before you start spending any money, these are a good place to start too. And you could get one that's a little bigger. I was really just curious how small I could go with a bait feeder. I'm always trying to figure out, the smallest, lightest way to accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish.
All right, so that does it for the review of the Okuma Avenger 20B bait feeder reel. If you like the review, give the video a like and subscribe to our channel. I've been doing lots of reviews on lots of multi-species fishing gear. That's what I focus on, is seeing how many kinds of species of fish I can catch and life listing and keeping track of the number of different species I can catch. So the gear that I look at focuses on that. How many different uses can I get out of this gear? And we always use the gear for usually a whole season before I even do a review on it. We buy all the stuff ourselves. We don't take free products from companies, so you get what I actually think. And I might be wrong, I might be right, but you get to see what I actually think. So thanks for watching Team Cramer Fishing. Until the next video, later.